which will be a much shorter video here, which is talking about the changes to the muscular system. We've done cardiovascular, we've done respiratory system. Let's look at the changes to the muscular system during exercise that take place, and then after we complete exercise, they return to resting levels after a period of time, like we saw in the graph in the previous video. So, acute muscular responses to exercise. Muscles have to make more contractions during exercise than they do pre-exercise. We saw in that running video earlier, which I can very quickly flash up and show again, that prior to the start of this run, this athlete was not moving very much. The muscles were not contracting. There weren't many messages being sent to the muscles. The muscles weren't having to switch on, switch off, and the agonist and antagonist reaction, like hamstring bending knee, quadriceps straightening knee, backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards, backwards, forwards, was not taking place in large amounts. And yet if we fast forward and we look at how many muscle contractions are taking place during exercise, we know that the demand is much higher. So there needs to be some changes taking place in and at the muscle site in order for this exercise to be able to be effective. So, what actually happens at the muscle site during exercise? Firstly, we have an increased blood flow to the muscles. Why? Because the muscles are demanding oxygen, because if the muscles have sufficient oxygen, they can be dealing with the aerobic system. And the aerobic system means that there's not going to be a buildup of lactic acid and we're not going to run out of phosphate and creatine quickly. So how does this happen? In the previous video, we spoke about vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So the blood vessels themselves, the arteries that are going towards a muscle that's using, like what we saw, maybe the calf muscle, the soleus or the gastrocnemius, the blood vessels that are heading down that way will dilate. And when they dilate, they allow for more blood to flow through than if they were in a regular capacity. But what we also need to happen is a constriction of the blood vessels that are going to other areas of the body that we don't need, maybe like the brain or the stomach. And so with this reaction taking place, more blood can go to the muscles that are requiring it. When this happens, it's because of motor units. Motor units are the messages that the brain is sending down to the muscle to say, I need you to switch on. And when that muscle gets that motor unit, that message from the brain, it needs to find ATP or it needs to resynthesize something to put ATP back together so that we can actually move that muscle. Everything that we discussed in energy systems continuing to take place, all three energy systems always working, because there is more messages being sent down, there are more recruitment of muscle fibers and activation of these fibers required. So what happens here is muscle fiber recruitment follows a size principle. Smaller and slow twitch fibers that are slower to contract, okay, followed by faster oxidative glycolytic fibers. The faster fibers are recruited, okay, while the slow twitch fibers are activated during all contractions. So slow twitch fibers are going away. All of a sudden, the motor unit is sent down. The message is sent to the muscle. Fast twitch fibers will start to activate because the brain has told them to. So this is when the motor unit starts to activate so that the muscle can contract maximally or not even at all, depending on how many fibers it's having to recruit at that time, depending on how fast or how hard you need that muscle to contract. The next thing that happens at the muscle site is the energy substrates. So things like ATP and phosphate creatine and even glucose glycogen, all of the items that are there that provide the energy to put ATP back together and ATP itself will end up decreasing because we're using them. And that is why, after exercise, we need to replenish. We need to rest to put the phosphate creatine back together, and we need to consume carbohydrates to put any lost glycogen back into that muscle site, ready for the next exercise bout. Body temperature. When we looked at energy systems themselves, and we spoke about in particular the aerobic system, we spoke about one of the byproducts of the aerobic system being heat. as well as H2O and carbon dioxide and additional energy. So if with the muscles are producing heat, and we know that all three energy systems are always working, and the moment there's a demand for an increase in muscle fibers to activate, we know that there's going to be an increase in heat production. And when that happens, the muscle itself undergoes a change, which is an acute response, which is an increase in body temperature overall. That means that the body wants to cool down to get back to that homeostasis, which is a comfortable working level, which means that blood vessels are going to want to try and dilate to try and sweat out because sweat cools us down. However, blood vessels are needing to vasoconstrict in certain areas because they need to dilate to get more oxygen down to the muscle. So the body goes through this fighting process of, do I give more oxygen down to the muscles so I can continue to create this heat? Or am I heating up too much, therefore I should constrict those blood vessels and start dilating the blood vessels going to the skin so that I can start cooling my body down. And that is one of the reasons why as well we begin to fatigue during exercise, on particular in hot days, and we can't continue to produce energy at that rate. Next thing that we can look at here is the summary of all the acute responses that take place. One of the things I hadn't discussed yet is the lactate production. And this particularly happens in maximal intensities where the body is relying upon the anaerobic glycolysis system, and we know that the anaerobic glycolysis system produces lactic acid. So obviously at the muscle itself, during the times where that energy system is predominant, more lactate will be produced in that muscle site and potentially stored in that muscle site. So what you can see here is a summary of all the changes that happen during exercise, and that those changes don't go back to normal the moment that exercise is completed. Those changes can take some time to go back to their resting conditions. This brings us to the end of our acute responses. This means that you guys should be ready now to ensure that you can answer all the questions in Chapter 7 and have that submitted to me. That will help with Mr. Smith and I getting our S and N's ready for the outcome tasks. And it also means that it brings to a close the energy systems and acute responses. So in tomorrow's lesson, we're going to be able to begin the final part of this outcome, which is talking about the fatigue mechanisms that take place. Why do we fatigue? We've alluded to this throughout a lot of the videos, the Zoom calls, and the things that we've presented to you. But we need to actually put some specific terminologies with this and create a set of notes and go through some questions for Chapter 8. If you have any questions about anything from Chapter 6 or Chapter 7, once you've watched these videos and you've gone through answering the Ed Rollo questions and the peak performance questions, please feel free to send me an email. Good luck.